Hi everyone, welcome to this interview by Core Recruitment. Thank you very much for joining us today. Core Recruitment, as you might be aware, is an international recruitment company. We do mid to senior level for exec and non-executive appointments. We're doing this interview series with lots of different business founders and leaders and inspirational characters from the sector to inject some positivity into the markets that we operate within. It's the only interview that I'm doing where I don't have a Core Recruitment logo or background going on behind me because I think Roland Horne, who we're interviewing today, would take the piss out of me too badly, and it would impacting the quality of the interview. But I have known Roland for a very long time. We used to talk lots during the pandemic when he was like, I've got two, three coffee sites. I'm going to be doing this thing. And every single thing that he spoke about a couple of years after the pandemic has actually come true. And we are immensely proud of him at Core Recruitment. Well done, Roland. How are you?
Thank you very much. Yeah, you're on the money there. I definitely would have taken the Mickey. It's worth saying that I think the last time I saw you, you were sort of slightly inebriated at the Soho House Festival. So let's start there, shall we? So I think I've got to dig in a little bit. Yeah, but no, it's obviously a pleasure to always do these things, and you guys have been an important part of our journey and continue to be. So yeah, pleasure to do it.
Excellent. Well, very pleased to have you here. Now, I want to talk about Watch House, and obviously, Watch House is the focus of today. But your story doesn't just start with Watch House because you were an entrepreneur, kind of like, before this. Can you tell us about the first business that you operated?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Irish originally, moved to the UK when I was seven, so hence the accent. Moved from the Midlands, sort of Brexit Britain heartland in Bassetlaw, down to the UK, so down to London, I should say, in for my undergraduate degree. And in my second year of studying economics and politics, I started to open up an aquarium design consultancy, which is the fancy way of saying a fish tank business. And for my bedroom or basement flat in Camden Town. And that grew, it was called Aquarium Architecture. That grew from its small business into sort of circa 5 million a year top line. And unlike hospitality, a teen level EBITDA return would be seen as a bad year. So it was a very sort of profitable business, cash generative business, but obviously quite high tense and quite intense as well, dealing with sort of billionaires and football players and everyone in between. So it was installing very big, large, and expensive aquariums. And then I had a team that we employed that would go out and maintain them, which was a sort of reoccurring revenue model. So I did that until effectively I got a sort of tap on the shoulder from a guy who was nearby in hospitality who said, would you like to invest in a small little shop, a watch house on Bermondsey Street as our sort of investor, and we'll do the running of it. And as part of that, I designed everything because I had the architects working in-house for me. And unfortunately, the operator decided in the end that he didn't want to do another operation. So I kind of decided to take it on myself in sort of 2012, 2013, and that would then sort of become WatchHouse.
Amazing. And with the aquarium business, that was a management buyout, right?
Yeah, exactly. So effectively, there was myself and a partner, and effectively he took me out. We bought a bunch of properties, mostly in London, but also in New York and LA. And effectively, I kept the estate, the properties that we built, and he kept the business. So it was kind of a divided. And then he gave equity to other people within the business as I left.
Amazing, really cool.
Mm.
Now, one of the things like that I've got from a lot of conversations we've had is that if it's a good situation, if it's a bad situation, if it's any opportunity, you always roll and seem to find the best part of it, and you always seem to find the most commercial approach to do it. This is like one of the best entrepreneurial traits that I've kind of like ever seen. Were you selling lemonade to the kids at school? Were you kind of like marking up the talk shop money? Was this something you always had? Where did this streak of entrepreneurship kind of come from in you?
I do think I often get people asking about, I've got a son or a daughter, and can you speak to them? I want them to become an entrepreneur, and I think it's a bit of a fool's errand. I think it is, I think you're you're kind of born to be a bit of a, dare I say it, Billy bullshitter, excuse the language, but it's true because entrepreneurship is ultimately that element of selling, and you have to be a sort of fake it till you make it kind of person, I think, and I think you can't really teach that. That's inherently given. But yeah, I mean, I think you've got to be super resilient. You've got to really, learn all those things. But I mean, my history was such that yes, I started the aquarium business, but prior to that, yeah, of course, I used to go to Macro and buy, I think it was 72 Cadbury's cream eggs, and bring them into school and sort of sell them for my bag and stuff. So I did all that kind of stuff, loved all that. Did young enterprise at school. I remember doing sort of a business called Bits and Bobs that was effectively cards and sort of little things that we would make and we'd sell them, and which we did quite well in terms of the competition. And yeah, I mean, I used to do perfume. So I don't mean kids do that, don't they? But you get rose petals from bushes and put it into water cans and shake it up and down and stand on the side of the street and try to sell it to people. So there was always something in me about wanting to sort of this stuff gamification, I guess, of life, I suppose you could say, which I always really enjoyed, kind of cheating the system or beating the system. And so, yeah, I mean, I remember the first time we sold an aquarium to someone who actually ended up becoming a business partner of mine with the deal we had in New York, where he wanted a shark tank. I've told him this a few times, so this is not breaking news. But he was my customer 001, and I was working in this aquarium shop in Hampstead whilst I was doing my undergraduate. One day a week, I used to go and help them out with their accounts. On the day that they were sort of, and the owner was emigrating to Australia, he decided to close the shop effectively. The day he was closing, this Greek guy came in and said, "Come to my house in St. John's Wood," and he was quite aggressive, which is the way he is now. It's kind of his MO. So myself and a business partner decided to sort of rock up on the number 46 bus from Camden to St. John's Wood, not really knowing where it was. Went onto this street on Hamilton Terrace, which is an amazing tree-lined, amazing street in St. John's Wood, and walked into his house and he said, "I want a shark tank in my basement." And literally, no word of a lie, he basically said, "What do you think it's going to cost?" And I said, "It costs about 50,000." I had no real idea, really. Within plus or minus 30,000, I would have said 50,000. He wrote me a check for 25 grand, handed it to me, and said, don't screw me over." And of course, like that was totally like we were absolutely flying by the sheet, flying by the seat of our pants in terms of the ability to do it. We ended up doing it. He ended up becoming a business partner outside of the aquarium business with me in property. But my point, I guess, is like this ability, I guess, to sort of like what's the worst that can really happen? Like the resilience piece is really important for entrepreneurs. And yeah, I've got it. It's hard sometimes, but it's very hard at times, but it's also super exciting. So yeah, happy.
I mean, I want a shark tank. I mean, for 50 grand. Big
I
shark,
know.
sharks, great whites. I mean,
Yeah,
what was that all
yeah,
about?
yeah. Well, he didn't do a shot tank then. He ended up doing a coral reef tank, which was far more lucrative for us and actually way more sustainable for the fish as well. But yeah.
Excellent. Do you think you ever could have had a corporate job, Roland?
I did have a corporate job. I had a corporate job for 6 months. So after I finished my master's degree, I did a master's in economic history at the London School of Economics. I'd already started the aquarium business at this time, so it was kind of part-time we were doing it. And then I ended up getting a job for an oil trading firm based out of London that was for a private oil trading firm. It's worth saying I'm an aquarist, so the coffee, the oil, the salt water, there's some of the commonality potentially here. Not that I believe any of that stuff, um, but yeah, so I worked for an oil trading firm for 6 months. I hated it. They hated me. I got fired. I remember to this day. And it taught me that I was far too immature in terms of where I was in my career to really, I was their third ever grad that they've ever brought on. They're a sort of huge company now, and everyone was there who was my peer, who kind of like got more money than God himself. But yeah, I hated it. It was just really inauthentic experience. And I think the authenticity piece is a very important personal trait for me. Sometimes it gets me in trouble. But I think that's also like it's quite fun to
I
be
love it.
authentic.
Now, people also say kind of like a lot that kind of like setting up and running your own business is almost like doing your own MBA because like the sales, there's marketing, there's business growth, there's all of that kind of stuff. But you actually went back to Oxford and did your master's, kind of like, can you tell us a bit about that experience and what you think it's added to your skill set in terms
Yeah,
of,
totally. So I mentioned the maturity piece a second ago. I mean I think it's generally typical with most men. I can't say why, but I know that it is a commonality that we are immature and we sort of mature at a later part of our lives. And I was too immature to do my A levels. I missed the grades I wanted to do. I ended up going to clearing to London to the School of Oriental and African Studies, as it was called, now known as SOAS for University of London. Ended up getting a 2-2 just because I messed up my first and second year, did well in my third year. Managed to sort of talk my way into LSE. They read the paper that I wrote that got me, that just missed the mark, and they liked it, and they brought me in. And it was that point that I started to mature. So I did very well in my masters at LSE, but I still had this like feeling ultimately of insecurity and sort of imposter syndrome. So during COVID, and in 2012, 2013, I toyed with the idea of going off to the US to do a 2-year MBA. And in the end, decided not to. Stayed with my partner at the time and had children, and sort of went fully obviously on WatchHouse, which opened in 2014. But during COVID, I was kind of like still bugging me that I never did it. So I applied to Oxford and a few of the business schools. Got into Oxford, and yeah, what's really interesting is I would always caveat this by saying I did it with a business, so it's helpful. I think having a real life experience talking about marketing strategy or P&L management or cash flow, whatever it is. But I ended up becoming second in class out of 70 people. Just missed out on the top spot, and which in many ways kind of dispelled some of the imposter syndrome that I had. Because truthfully, I was kind of like, can I really mix it? Um, and turns out that I could. So yeah, it was an amazing experience. I recommend it to anybody. It's more of a vocational life experience rather than that I come out now and I can talk to you about, net present cash values and stuff, which I probably could, but in the day of AI nowadays, I don't think it's that significantly important. It's more about the sort of the look and touch and feel of life, which it taught me.
Absolutely. And you mentioned this imposter syndrome. Was this kind of trying to make credible, to your phrase, the Billy bullshitter? Was this trying to, like, is academia something which is like you prize quite highly?
I think that I've come to learn. I've written a bit about this, and it's if you Google it, you can see what I've written about. But I think imposter syndrome is everywhere, and I think what's interesting is we don't really talk about it, even in this more sort of woke period that we live in, which is great. We just don't really talk about it. That we don't feel like we're good enough to do things. And dare I say it without putting you on the spot, I'm sure that the moments you have, like moments of like, oh my God, is core actually as good as it really is? And here I am interviewing whoever from what F&B out, well, gee, that's really cool, or whatever it is. Like we all have those moments where it's like, pinch me, kind of like, geez, should I really be here? And actually, I would argue if you don't have those moments, then lucky you. But also, are you pushing yourself hard enough?
Hmm.
Um, so, so, so anyway, the point here is like embracing imposter and understanding that that you are good enough. So if you're in the room, like, why can't you be?
Now, coming on to Watch House, for those who have not been into a Watch House, kind of like, one of your houses kind of like before, tell us a bit about the concept as is, and then a little bit about your growth plans.
Yeah, sure. So, Watch House, as I say, was sort of born out. It was born out of my, I guess, frustration slash interest in hospitality experience and generally in terms of, I'd worked in that world of very high end spaces with the likes of Foster's and Partners and Candy and all those things with the aquarium side of my life. And then so I kind of looked at hospitality from a viewpoint of actually that it's kind of lazy what's going on. And I don't think it's really been done for the right reasons. And it was reinforced by that when I went off and saw in 2015, 16, I took a sabbatical for a year after Watch House had been founded to go and sort of spend a lot of time with my former partner in Australasia, principally, and in America for a year. And I saw like really, really authentic and connected hospitality experiences, particularly obviously in Asia, in Japan, Korea, but also obviously very much in Australia, which of course everyone knows is sort of the mecca of some ways of hospitality to a degree in terms of that connectivity. So so Watch House was, I came back and thought, right, we really need to build something here that connects. Like my view on this, I think I've said it to you before, maybe on different podcasts, is, our guests that visit our spaces often will speak to their barista more times in a calendar year than they will their mum and dad. And like
Hmm.
that's got to count for something. And so if they're going to do that and they're going to sit on that bench or that seat in a Watch House and say Covent Garden or Seven Dials, more often they sit at their family home sofa or dining table, like that's got to be thought about in terms of that time spent and their enjoyment. So yeah, I wanted to create something that felt authentic, real, had good product, like keep it super simple, great culture, which I think, I really wanted to create a team. And you see some of the great leaders in our space, the Dishomes and the Caravans of this world that really sort of lean into that. And I really wanted to create something that really people felt connected to, best in class, aspirational. So Watch House fundamentally is on its boilerplate is a premium specialty coffee bricks and mortar brand for the most part. Obviously, we have our own online service, etc. But for the most part, it is as the wallpaper behind me suggests, a sort of a very high end, high thought of connected hospitality experience. And we now are across three continents, obviously, with the US, the UK, and more recently in the UAE. We're just about to sign a deal. We just signed a deal, sorry, to open in Kuwait with franchise partners. Same with Qatar. We're in conversations for Saudi Arabia, Singapore, and Korea. Um, and in the US, we've got obviously we're opened up in New York now. We've got two locations, one in Fifth Avenue, one in the Chrysler Building. We've got another half a dozen in construction or design at the moment, which is papers signed in Manhattan. We're in advanced discussions to open up in Beverly Hills in 2027, and I fly to Miami on Sunday to go and spend a week there because we're looking at some locations in Miami as well. So it's just starting to get super interesting, and I want to create the best specialty coffee brand in the world, bar none, and I'm really proud of it coming from Britain, even if I have an Irish passport, proudly Irish passport.
Love that. Now, for a lot of people, like that international expansion piece is very much on their agenda at the moment. It's kind of like the UK can be a challenging economy and all that kind of side of things. And especially going to America is kind of like the dream for lots of companies and organizations. And there's lots of UK companies that have mixed experiences of going there. Uh,
Mm.
Tell us about what challenges you've faced. And is there kind of like a point of critical mass where, I don't know if the business is profitable, it's not profitable, kind of like where it becomes commercially viable for you to be there?
Yeah. So a couple of things on this. I because of the news about the investment through High Post, obviously the Bezos connection, I was doing a conversation this morning actually with the Times that will break this. It will already be broken by the time this goes out early next week. And that exact question was asked. And I think there's it's kind of dangerous. I mean, one of the things the MBA taught me actually was like statistically you have to have 30 data points for there to be an actually factual correlation, which you never really think about, but it's true. And so therefore I think it's quite hard if you just look at Pret and Sushi went there and Hawksmoor have gone and Wags and others. Um, I think because the data sets just aren't big enough actually, and I think then you throw in COVID in the middle of that, which really hurt Pret in the US. So, US landlords are incredibly litigious, and this is what it is. There's no break, etc. So. And also, I understand now that Pret have turned the corner and are now profitable over that. My learnings, and it has to be said, sort of chapeau to Will Becker, because I spent a bit of time with him asking for his advice. And we're literally about to open our third location on Park Avenue South, right next door to him, ironically. Um, I asked him the question, and I distinctly remember he said it's kind of a game of fours. And I was kind of, what do you mean? He said, well, the first thing is to say to you is like bring culture carriers, so like hire as many as you can from home because that sort of culture piece is really important. Totally agree. We did that, and thank you, Tim, for that advice. But the game of fours was, he said it's four times as long to do things. Things just take ages. It's four times as expensive. He said you'll make four times revenue and profit because it is a very people spend money out there, and importantly, it's four times as fun. And I found that to be quite aspirational and inspirational, and I took that with me when we opened Watch House and thought, well, yeah, that's a really interesting insight, and that's what we found. So our Fifth Avenue location absolutely flies, pound for pound, dollar for dollar. It's our best performing location in our estate, and just there's a couple of new in London that absolutely fly as well. Um, but yeah, I think that there's an optimism there outside the UK, and I think this kind of notion that there's many more Londons in the US than there are in the UK is kind of what my mentality is. Like, there's just it's just a bigger pool of optimism and obviously capital and critical mass of people, etc. So their business is profitable out there. And the other thing about it, which is really interesting, is of course you get to kind of have a second stab of life, right? So you know what you did wrong the first time, and you know how to set it up properly on the second time round. It doesn't come without its challenges, of course. Um, and which there have been, such as we have to take cash in New York. We're mandated to do so, even though we are a cashless business elsewhere. And sometimes that cash does go missing. There's those kinds of small things that you kind of forget as the basic things of what happens in hospitality when you don't have those kind of when you have those systems in place in the UK and you don't in the US. Um, so it's not without its challenge, but there's just a huge amount of optimism over there and opportunity, which I think is a large part of why the High Post guys came in and invested in us. Because they see it. And I think we've got really, really open water for us to grow into in terms of, there's just so much. And actually, weirdly, people always think that the US has a really high quality coffee because they're just going the cup of Joe, all that kind of stuff. It isn't. It's seen as a utility. It's not seen as a premium consumption. And Blue Bottle, I think, moved that forward. But of course, have changed since Nestle bought them. And we're now at that next evolution where the sort of heir apparent to that, which I'm super excited about.
Love that. Now, lots of companies have been talking about kind of like the lack of funding, the challenges in funding, like, and you've gone through private investors, finance houses. I think one of the most successful crowdfundings, which I've ever heard about anyway, possibly kind of like in the sector. Tell us about like the pros and cons of each and what your experience has been like overall.
Yeah, no, we're really proud. We are still to this day the 10th highest ever crowd raise on CrowdCube, and the highest ever food and beverage purely equity raise. I know BrewDog obviously did a very large debt raise way back when, but as a pure equity play, we raised the highest. So we're sort of rubbing shoulders with Monzo, Revolut, What Three Words, all this kind of businesses, which is amazing. And very much driven by our customer base. Like they really sort of that really was kind of like the push on that. Yeah, I mean, funding's hard. I mean, people always kind of, the often thing I get is, I walk into a meeting and they go, well, I'll give you some coffee, but it won't be as good as yours. And I quite like instant coffee. Like I've got, I enjoy it. Like it's like anything. It's like you want to have a burger from a burger van sometimes, and you want to have like a gourmet burger from somewhere else. But like, so what I have been good at in our business is more the storytelling piece around raising capital, what we're trying to do, what's the sort of raison d'etre for being in what we're doing. And yeah, so raising funds and sort of that element is hard. It's definitely a slog. It is that thing you hear all the time about, ask 100 people, expect 99 no's and get one yes. Um, and it's a navigation through, right? We originally received funded from a EIS VC fund who are still today on our cap table and our second largest shareholder still behind me. Great human beings, like just first and foremost, and been super supportive throughout, including through COVID. But they also faced their own challenges during that period where the world was kind of sitting at home and saying, like, let's not invest in anything. So we went out and spoke to, they continued to support the business, but to fulfill what we needed to do, we had to go out and also get some assistance from elsewhere. We did the crowd raises, which went obviously super, super well. And then off the back of that, we got approached by various family offices. It's worth saying that through that period, we did speak to some of the usual PE houses again in the UK, principally in the UK, who basically said, the world's changed and we're not sure, and like, they had the same problems, the same LP challenges from their investors. And so we basically went to family offices and said, listen, what do you like? I mean, we've got a Lord of the Realm on our cap table, which I quite like. We've got celebrities on our cap table. We've got former famous football players who I used to remember watching, who've sort of reached out and want to be part of the journey. And on High Post, they're just really, really good. But the commonality between all these people is they are super engaged. They understand best in class. They feel it. It's not just a numbers game. And I think now what we've got in our business is a cap table which is amazingly supportive. People always think it's a negative thing, I want to keep 100% of my equity. I mean, like, sure, I get it. But actually, what I found is like we've got a CTO of a huge cosmetic brand on our cap table, and she's amazing. I won't say who it is for privacy reasons, but so I could pick up the phone to her and go, "Tell me about your experience in best in class digital experience within your store in terms of trying on makeup. Tell me about how you use AR and all that kind of stuff." So it's a real knowledge bank and a real army of supporters, which just goes super, super far. So I'm really excited by what we've done so far on the funding and the cap side.
So I read a report very recently that kind of like on average, when a founder exits a business after private equity, blah, 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 has all been involved, they generally get about 6% of the total value of the business when like the sales transaction kind of like happens.
Interesting.
There
Interesting.
was actually kind of like a situation, I'm not going to name names and all that kind of stuff, where there was a very high profile kind of like sale that went through where the founder actually got significantly less than that, which I was reading about quite recently. So I guess that this balance between getting your funding, making the right deal, all of that kind of stuff, for a lot of these entrepreneurs that are kind of coming through, it's kind of like they wouldn't have, I don't want to sound patronizing, but may not have the knowledge in order to get the best possible deal for themselves in the fight to keep their business alive and make that money. What advice and support did you get when you were going through that whole process? And what advice would you give to others at the moment?
Yeah, it's a great, great, great question. So again, because in my experience in our sector, the founders in our sector tend to be technical founders in this business. So they are your
Yep.
former coffee champions, come from the coffee and the barista side, and people like me generally seem to be generally. This is probably maybe this is the imposter syndrome coming out a little bit as well, chip on the shoulder, but I don't care. It's how I feel. It's what drives me. Um, that sort of the money men, the people who come into the world of coffee, or people. In many ways, it's been bastardized, of course, by the huge multinationals of yesteryear that we all know. But I think what drives me is this notion that I do want to have a successful financial career, yes, and look after my family and all those things, but also to look back and go, what, I've done something that I feel super proud of. That yes, that has been successful monetarily as well. But I think so. I'm lucky because I don't come from like you asked me about a terroir in like a Colombian field that's 1,800 feet or meters, what have you, above sea level. It's not like that's not my skill set. It's not what I know. I've got people in the business that know that inside and out. I can tell you a good cup of coffee, of course I can, but I don't need to go into the nth degree about it because that's not what interests me. But what does interest me is the overall business of what we do. And it's not just money. Yes, that's important, but it's also the success element of what we are doing or not. And so I think when I had my experience of raising capital, I didn't take any money off the table until um, what were we now, 2026, like 3 years ago. Um, and it was enough that I was able to kind of get, okay, well, this now feels like, if it all goes wrong, I'll be okay. And obviously subsequent to that, we've done rounds and now obviously I'm still now the largest shareholder in the business. So in the event that we were sold tomorrow, um, I would account for sort of 20, 25% of the waterfall, as it were. Um, but I'd also say, you know, would you rather have 25% of a business that sold for 100 million, or would you rather have 6% of a business that sold for 2 billion, right? Or something like that. That the numbers add up. But you know what I mean? The point is like the ultimate point here is like I wouldn't look purely. I think some of the mistakes founders make is like just looking at the equity position. The control thing's different. Of course, you want executive control, and I've been lucky in that our investors have backed me. They believe in me, which is really helpful. Obviously, I know of experiences where maybe more technical founders have been sort of ousted by PE and then off they go, and we might speak in 2 years' time, and I'll be off somewhere else and be after being ousted as by my new investors. But jokes aside, I think like the advice for me would be find people that don't have skin in the game to get opinions from. Like
Yeah.
your corporate finance advisors are obviously incentivized because they get a percentage of the pie whenever you do a deal. Obviously, your existing investors can't be completely abstract. They can't be. They're obviously biased for obvious reasons. So, and finding those people. I mean, things like YPO, without talking too much, like YPO is a good sort of founder and CEO network to having those questions. Massive shout out to Shamil from Dishoom, who I regularly touch base with and say, how's it going? And there's other people, Karen Jones and others that are along the way that have been really good sort of confidants and people I've spoken to along the way as well. So I think finding those people who don't have skin in the game but have miles on the clock is also a really good way of sort of getting it done.
So both are amazing characters, amazing characters. I guess kind of like the next question more related to the copy market, because like we've obviously been recruiting in the sector for a long time. And like had you have said like, 5 years ago to people kind of like the impression was coffee market's saturated, you're not going to get any more shops in, like, what's the market niche, all of that kind of stuff. And now obviously there's been this kind of like, massive boost in kind of like premium coffee. When you're looking at kind of like opportunities, threats, all of that kind of stuff in terms of the next 5 years, I mean, obviously the matcha thing, the next thing, what is coming down the line within that kind of premium coffee space that you want to be super aware of for the next 5 years to keep yourself relevant?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. So I think, yeah, I mean, I don't see. I was talking to someone from Genki recently who are opening right next to us in Battersea Power Station, and actually, I don't see this. I see there's loads of space for brands such as ours that are obviously coffee focused but have a very strong matcha offering, and then brands that maybe like Genki that are the opposite, where it's like they don't do any coffee at all, but they do matcha. And I think the point here is, I think there's enough space for different brands to live within here. So to answer your question, I think what we're mindful of is doing things that are true to our style and what we want to do. So you would have seen the proliferation of, very brightly coloured, infused matcha drinks from various parties. One of which, of course, we all know, and a competitor of mine who've done a fantastic job at really owning that space and pivoting, which I massively take my hat off to. Um, but I think for me, in the next 5 years, I think there is definitely going to be this sort of definitely more move, it'll continue evolution and moving towards the digital side of that experience, which I think is definitely still not quite there within our space. I think it could be in our sector could be significantly better. And I also think the sort of the personalization of drinks, Starbucks were famous for doing that. It's one of the things that they actually started to become very problematic for them because there were so many iterations of drinks that could be done, but like creating your own product, I think is quite an appealing thing. And I think we as an industry should be looking to try and to embrace that within the limitations of the operational side. I also think functional products. So I think I can speak for myself here as well, but like I think that sort of move more towards sort of the protein elements of how the protein, the health infused elements into what we do is something that's very important as well. But again, from our perspective, what we don't want to do is we don't want to do things in sort of a twee or non-watch house way. So it has to feel on brand for us. And it's worth saying, I think like we generally are seen a bit as a bit of a slow mover when it comes to these kinds of innovations. Like we want to sort of step back, see what the market's doing, and then sort of assess what we want to do in that space rather than being a true first mover. I'm okay with that. Like obviously we innovate by ourselves on products that people don't do at all, right? But I don't what I don't want to do is sort of the Me Too approach towards what's happening out there is probably the wrong thing. If you care deeply about your brand. Um, and the other thing I would say as well is the convenience factor. So I'd say that the speed element, I mean, what's going to happen in the last sector in the next 5 years is, and you're seeing it already, like significant increases in automation. Obviously, AI is everywhere now, which we're using loads more of. And I think that ability for like really increasing the speed of what we do, which is normally the biggest static and externality of grab and go specialty products within the wet space. Those things will significantly increase as they continue and the continued evolution of speed technology and automation.
Yes. Now, we touched on this kind of like a little bit throughout, but like the integrity, the CSR, like, all of the kind of like approach that WatchHouse kind of has, is phenomenal. I can say that kind of like, knowing lots of people that have been in the business and all of that kind of stuff as well. It's not just a label, it's values that you guys live and breathe. There's
Mm.
this that I really wanted to pick up with you because I think it's really interesting, but you're part of the JP Morgan Military Veterans Program.
hmm
Could you just tell us about what that involves, how you give back, what you get out of it, and just why you're involved in it as well?
Yeah, it's worth saying that I did that about a year ago, and it's not something I've done for an awful long time. And I think it's because of the capacity of what I'm doing. I don't know how much longer that will continue. But what effectively this is the ability to effectively take veterans that have come back from, who've retired or been incapacitated through being in service and bring them back into the working environment, right? So there was a great guy in Somerset who was running a kombucha business out of amazing like sort of shed experience down in Somerset. So and he had like Scoobies, which is like the big like if people know kombucha, but Scooby is basically like the sort of crust that's on top of kombucha. It kind of is the living products that creates kombucha. And he'd walk into this sort of like shed full of stuff, and he'd be in there like so doing all these wonderful things. But his issue was like, how do I get this thing to market? What's the branding? What's my route to market? And of course, capital and all those things. So it's basically an ability to sort of offer some insight around how best to grow your business and to give back to people who have obviously gone out and served and done altruistic things for us and other people, and therefore we should sort of reciprocate.
Absolutely. Now, not every day is a sunny day in business. I'm sure people are watching this thinking, oh, Roland, he's expanded his business to Dubai. He's done this, he's done that, he's done the next thing, yeah, blah, blah, blah. Tell us about something which hasn't gone quite so well and what you learned from it. I don't want to use the word failure, but I'm just going to throw it out there.
Um, Failure. I mean, there's a very personal one, but maybe I won't go into that here. But
Oh, come on,
but
you're amongst friends, right?
yeah, I, I mean, I think that what I learned doing the MBA, and it's still something that I sort of struggle with, is kind of that sort of Manhattan graph of life. Sounds a bit berry and cheesy, but just stick with me for a moment. And it is kind of like the business success of life coupled with the sort of the health success of life, yes, financial and relationship. And during the period of, you know, the period of growing my businesses, I've probably neglected some of those verticals, some of those buildings, I suppose you could say, and some to the long term sort of negative sort of I guess the sort of the fatal element of some of one of those things, or I've managed to sort of recover them and sort of to improve upon them. So I think the failure, if I was to pick one, would be one in which I haven't um, strategically thought about this how balanced those buildings should ultimately be. And I think as I'm now 40, and I've got an opportunity now for the rest of my life to sort of think about things a bit more holistically, which I think comes from it's the maturity point, right? You don't really think
Mm.
about. Um, I mean, I was thinking I saw everyone's favorite supervillain, Elon Musk, talking to someone yesterday, and they were saying like he doesn't ever go out for dinners. Like it's just not what he does. He just eats what he works, which he works all the time and sleeps 5 hours a day, and like obviously soon to be a trillionaire, but like. But show me his Manhattan graph. Like the Manhattan graph, that balance is important, and I think that's my failure to date. And then we've got loads of micro things, right? Like trying to launch a British tapas business in Better Lane when I don't really get coffee shops that like are open in the morning and then trade into the evening. I know that there are some that are great and some do it super well, but as a whole, a brand doesn't work. Like it's weird. And I tried to do that, and we didn't lose money, but we didn't make money really. They made a little bit. So until we sort of revamped that, I went back into what we're good at. Um, Also, I would say culturally, like um, I think it'd be too strong to say that culture has been a failure of ours. It hasn't. It's been a very important part of our growth. But did I, at the very start, sit down and go, what do I want this business to be culturally? Absolutely not. And I am not a culture warrior whatsoever. Like I'm not, I've got great people working the business. Obviously, shout out to Caroline, who's, you know, just lights up everyone's life, including mine. Um, but rather than sort of the cynical kind of like what's going on, why is this not right, all that kind of stuff. So I think like culturally, if I could go back as well, the failure would be like to not create a blueprint prior to starting, which most people don't, right? But I think now that is definitely something to sort of look back on and try and improve upon. And I tell people now when they start businesses, just always do it with the entrepreneurial operating system, which I go on and on about. But the EOS process is just like that's all you need. Just do that, and things are good.
Absolutely. I love the Manhattan graph, though. I haven't heard that for a while. I'm gonna dust that off. That's amazing. Now, in your very early career, when you started off, you were actually in politics to a degree, working in the House of Commons.
Yeah.
Don't want to make this into party political broadcast or statements, however, but I mean, you've always had very strong political views and values and a sense of moral compass in terms of what's right, what's wrong. Do you think you might go back into politics one day? And what do you think's the kind of what do you think of the current political landscape?
You're literally following the exact same questions as the Times about 3 hours ago. So I'm super prepared and ready and warm for this. It's something I toy with a lot. I mean, again, I'm Irish, right? So I always go back to that point where I'm like, do I really want to go into sort of British politics, even though technically legally I can? Just let's just start there. I mean, I'm a Labour supporter where I believe in the fundamentals of what the Labour Party stands for in terms of fairness, social equality, etc. It is incredibly difficult as an entrepreneur and a business person, as someone who spends all their day sort of in many ways in this sort of on the sell side of like what we're doing and like, to see what's happening at the moment. I mean, I was super excited when the guys came in, and it's worth saying that 2009, 10, 11, I was 12. I was very active in Young Labour at the time. So I won't say names, but quite a few in the cabinet are people that I certainly call contemporaries, but I wouldn't necessarily say they were friends, some of which I still sort of text from time to time. But yeah, the PR element, the sort of the perception of reality is totally misaligned. And like him or Loden, and Alistair Campbell knew how to sort of to spin a good story, right? And it made us feel great. And like, I mean, I'm 40 years old now. And you'll of course also remember like they were arguably some of the best times that we've ever had economically from a feel good factor time. And so I think coming back to the politics side, yeah, I often toy with it. And actually, the Times reporter asked me the same question, and I said, if as long as private equity hasn't kicked me out or whatever, like, yeah, could I see myself at sort of 45 years old turning to Labour Party and really doing something significant? Yeah, I absolutely could because I do think there is a miss in real world, real people, authentic engagement, certainly within the Labour Party. And I'm no fan of Nigel Farage, without getting too party political here. I'm not at all, or Bojo. But I do think those people have the ability to connect, and I think that we're missing that in the Labour Party, and we need it. Actually, I was asked this, and I've said this quite a few times. It's probably get me in trouble at some point, but I got asked to go to a private bank, Swiss bank, and talk as the sort of the keynote speaker for I won't say the bank, but they reached out, wanted an entrepreneur conversation. So I rocked up and I thought there was going to be like 15 people in the room, or whatever else. And it turned out to be 300 people in this room, all suited and booted. Of course, I wasn't. Um, nor will I ever be. And then it was also live streamed to their New York office. And I was sitting there, and it was me on stage with this guy interviewing me. The guy who's interviewing me was like, he worked for them, but I think he used to be on like Made in Chelsea or something. So he was a bit of a party animal. So I was talking about, he asked me this question, and I said to him, well, like I think people want real people. And I mentioned about, narcotic use. I've done that. I'm not going to lie about it. I have done it before in the past. It was bloody fun, even though you need to not be stupid and not do it very regularly and not do it at all potentially to who you are. But I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I shouldn't drink, I shouldn't have fun, I shouldn't do these things. It's who I am as a person. And I think real people in this world they want real authentic connection, and they want people that talk just normally and sensibly. And I think in this world of over politicization of any answer, anything you do, it leaves the void for the Farages and the Trumps and all those people who are a bit dafter and do have maybe slightly more mendacious ways of looking at the world, but it leaves the vacuum for them to move into. And so, yeah, I have looked and thought to myself that I'd be very interested in going back into that. And I'm not going to apologize for being who I am. And I'm a decent person, I'm a good dad, and I'm a good businessman, and I'm even prouder Irishman. So like, I'm not perfect, but I'm real.
I love all of that. Love all of that. Well, hopefully you've got a wee bit of business building to do in coffee before you take on UK politics. Roland.
Hopefully,
There you go.
hopefully,
I
hopefully.
enjoyed every minute of that. Thank you so much for sharing. Thank you so much for being so candid with us, and like massive congratulations on all the success so far. But I've got a
Appreciate
feeling
it.
we're going to be doing another one of these in 2 years' time when you're doing something more exceptional. So I can't wait for
Hope so.
that.
Thank you.